Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, March 27th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So, Donald Trump last night declared that there is going to be a 25% tariff flat across the board on auto parts and automobiles made outside the United States. And it's going into effect next week. So the period of uncertainty regarding whether or not he would actually lower the boom and do the tariffs, which were before largely country directed, unless I'm very much mistaken. I mean, it was like, we're going to tariff Japan, we're going to tariff China, we're going to tariff. This is now a specific set of products. And it's very, very big because I believe this is the third largest or the fourth largest sector of the economy. And aside from housing, of course, the car is the most expensive object that people buy, that ordinary people must own and have to buy. And anything that makes them more expensive is inflationary and regressively inflationary, since it will hit people who buy cars who have less money and more money, unless this then drives them into the secondary market, which of course then inflates.
Buy Volvos, which are the least produced in the United States of the major car companies.
But apparently 50% of the cars currently sold in the new cars are currently sold in the United States will fall under this tariff, as I understand it. So
many parts are sourced from outside, even if vehicles are assembled here.
Right.
Interestingly enough, the two companies who are, according to Axios, completely manufactured in the United States are Tesla and Rivian. And Rivians are insanely expensive already. So they'll be safe from the tariff. It's not quite right to say that this is the first sectorial tariff. You know, Trump has tariffed steel. He's tariffed aluminum. He just tariffed copper the other day. And so now I guess he's moving from commodities to an industry, the car industry, autos, with the 25% tariff. This would be in addition to all the other tariffs. So if you have the reciprocal tariffs coming on April 1st, what Trump calls Liberation Day, on the EU, which could be anything from a 20% tariff on EU products, this auto tariff would be on top of it for European manufactured cars. So that gets to the point where the producers would have really no room but to pass off some of the cost onto the consumers.
Is there one exception where there was something about the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement participants and auto parts, and then those parts coming as part of that agreement are exempt from this tariff? Although, to your point, Matt, it's still going to lead to a rise in prices for anyone trying to fix or buy a car because of all the other parts that are being.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. You know, and what it leads to is what I was about to say is, like all the tariff threats, it's not done until it's done. So he's saying this is coming next week. We really don't know what's going to happen in the end. He could decide to delay them. He could decide to say, well, Mexico has been good. He seems to like Claudia Sheinbaum. So we're not going to tariff the parts coming from Mexico. And this is just the way his trade policy works. It's extremely ambiguous, and it really just gives him the maximum discretionary power to determine what's tariffed and what's not. Just one other point on this, you know, the big story in automobiles for the past couple of years has been the rise of Chinese electric vehicles, in particular BYD, which are flooding the markets overseas. Biden, of course, put on 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. But even here, I think we can view the Trump tariffs on autos as a way to basically stop the eventual reach of Chinese electrics into the United States. So there I think geopolitical reasons for this, as much as there are just Trump's tariff man love for protectionism.
Well, that's putting lipstick on a pig the big way, since of course we would have a bipartisan putting tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles on the grounds that they represent kind of a threat to national security, as was the case with certain types of tariffs on, or tariffs is not the right word, import controls in the 1980s on certain types of computer products and others, even to genuinely friendly countries like Japan, done in the name of the idea that we needed to maintain technological supremacy in these fields and that we did not have sufficient controls over whether or not the intellectual property that was being sold to these places would not then be ripped off, stolen, and used to the detriment of the United States. But that's not really how he's selling it. And as I say, like, I think every administration would have pursued a policy like this. So the question you got to look at is, if we did economics on a timeline, and we did them on a 10-year timeline, we had a 10-year plan, which of course we shouldn't, because the economy is too dynamic for that. But if what you wanted to say was that in 10 years, if you really do this and you hold it in place, that the entire world market would shift, that there would be new construction of certain types of plants in the United States to take care of the domestic market, that maybe China wouldn't zoom ahead with its electric car market, because it is kind of depending on countries that will have the infrastructure to support electric cars if they're going to be sold, meaning us, since no other, I mean, I don't think they're, in Brazil, they're building charging stations and that sort of thing. And you were to look in 2035 and say, well, this was a wildly successful policy. We re-domesticated the auto industry. We compelled auto companies to build plants here rather than there. We gave a real boost to domestic manufacturing. And after a period of unsettlement, of unsettling uncertainty and all of that, things are rebalanced. Cars are a little more expensive, but way more Americans are employed, and the American economy is now being run in America with its most expensive consumer good. Problem is getting from 2025 to 2035. That's the yada, yada, yada problem, which is what's going to happen to inflation? What's going to happen to the stock market? What is it going to be like for people now who have to deal with a market that is going to go into complete chaos? And again, it's not like it's the toothpaste market or it's the, toothbrush market. This is a product that even in its used form costs people a significant amount of their annual income, or requires them to borrow money at a significant amount that they will often borrow at what might be uxorious rates, depending on where the interest rates are. I mean, so Trump, we have this discussion also about things like Social Security reform and Medicare reform and all kinds of reforms that involve the entirety of the economy, which is, let's take not even government reforms, but changing the mortgage interest deduction for homes, right, which is a distorting effect on the cost of homes. Terrible distorting effect. It was a mistake. We should never have done it. But we've had it for, almost 70 years. And if you lift it, suddenly people's homes are going to be worth 35% less than they were before, 25% less than they were before, and it'll all shake out. But the shakeout period is impossible, is a period of unbelievable uncertainty. And you're talking about people who are going to be immiserated by this decision to sort of, downshift the American economy or rebalance the American economy. And that's why it doesn't get done. That's why it never gets done, because nobody can figure out how to get from here to the yada, 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 to the glorious future in which everything gets restabilized.
And if I had to bet, I'd say it won't get done this time. I mean, Trump pretends that there's a 10-year plan. There's not a 10-day plan. As Matt says, tariffs they don't happen till they happen. And even when they happen, they can last a day or a weekend or a few days.
Yeah,
so,
I agree with Abe. What have we seen with Trump so far in the second term? Obviously a lot. But one theme that I've detected is his love of foreign direct investment in the United States, his celebration whenever an international company says that it's going to invest in the United States. Whenever this happens, he has a photo op at the White House. He gets the announcement. He chalks it up as another win. So I think you can also look at the tariff threat, on autos, as a means of leverage to get foreign auto companies to come to Trump and say, hey, you know what? In order to avoid the tariff, we want to build a new factory in Ohio. And when they do that, he's going to have a photo opportunity. He's going to say, look what this is, a wonderful thing. Oh, and maybe I'll make an exception, or maybe I'll delay some of the tariffs on it. So it's a big number to get big headlines, but in the actual implementation, I think it might not be as dramatic as some people say.
Okay, well, so what we're supposed to now think is that, it's all right. He doesn't really, not that he doesn't mean it, but that it'll all work out somehow. He'll pull back from the brink. He won't really do it. He's not really going to do it. At some point, he's really.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all. I said he's going to. Toyota's going to say. I said Toyota's going to say.
Right,
Mr. Trump, we love you so much. In order to avoid these tariffs, we're going to build a new plant in Tennessee. And when they do that, he's going to say, beautiful, wonderful. This is all I want to do. Come to the White House. Come to my new patio on the Rose Garden. And we're going to talk, and then we're going to go, and we're going to give a press announcement, and it's going to be another example of me winning. And then maybe he'll lift the tariff, and maybe he won't.
But it's a really mixed message. I went and read the little fact sheet that the White House put out about the upcoming auto tariffs, and half of it, the first half, is all about national security. I'm doing this with the authority that's vested in the president to place tariffs on other countries as a matter of national security, the supply chain issues that Matt mentioned earlier. But then the second half is all arguments for why it's not going to make the economy worse, why it's not going to lead to any sort of inflationary impact on consumers. So I think that it's a strategy that relies, and perhaps this is why he does it, because it'll work. It relies on his assumption that the American people will buy both or neither argument and just wait and see what happens. But the economic markets, I think, are confused about whether this is a matter of national security and so is likely to happen and consistently have some follow through, or if it's just, as you say, kind of a deal-making way to get foreign investment in the U.S. So the message coming out of the White House is itself confusing, which is leading to confusion in the markets too.
I don't know. I mean, I think he means it. He likes them. He thinks that it's the magic bullet solution to all problems, in the sense that it essentially, in his mind, levies taxes to help the American people on foreigners. So it's like, you're going to pay a tax to sell goods in the United States, and therefore I can cut taxes here. And I wish that were true. Like, it would be wonderful if there was a solution to the problem of Americans being taxed too much and also wanting a government that's too large. It would be great if there were, if you could pull one off the shelf and solve the problem. The only other solution to the problem is some massive economic growth in the form of the creation of some entirely new market. Like, suddenly we get fusion, we get nuclear fusion, and energy costs go to zero, and then nothing costs anything, and then everything is wonderful. But
I think you're right, John, to look at it as a whole. The tariffs are one part of the Trump economic plan. They are the most disruptive part, and they are also the part that is actually being implemented most rapidly. And I think that's what's causing the gyrations in the stock market. That's what's causing a lot of worry among people, because the other elements of the Trump economic plan, deregulation, unleashing American energy, and then finally the tax cut are not coming online as swiftly as the tariffs. And I particularly focus on the tax cut because it seems that we're at another standstill here where the House has moved along, passing its budget resolution, laying the groundwork for maintaining and broadening the Trump tax cuts. But the Senate is holding it up. And so until you get like the elixir of tax cuts, the bitter herb of tariffs is what's going to remain in the voters' mouths. That's a very biblical metaphor for me this morning. You know,
that was
I
beautiful.
I didn't realize my inner poet would come out so early today.
It was so good, but of course, you have to separate these things out. Yeah, so if you take it as a totality, if you get tariffs on the one hand, but you get the extension or the permanent investment of the Trump tax cuts of 2017 with some other provisions added, and as you say, the unleashing of our domestic energy markets with some more deregulation, you could have 2027 could be an amazing year. Problem is 2025 and 2026 and second is that the inflationary effect, particularly of the auto and lumber tariff, if he does in fact put through a lumber tariff, are not only colossal or potentially colossal, but as I say, hit hardest not on the wealthy, but on the struggling, because the way a readjustment of an entire consumer market, which is the automobile market, is if X happens with tariffs and puts upward pressure on prices on expensive goods, and then people have to downshift into the less expensive versions, then that money is chasing too few vehicles that are being made, and those go up in price, and then you go ratchet down to the third level, and the same thing happens there, and it goes down to used cars, which also jump in price. There is no escape from the inflationary force of these tariffs. And as I said, if it were the toothbrush market, you could kind of absorb it. Like the cost of this as a global policy to the American consumer is kind of unprecedented. I mean, it's not, you're not even talking about like a 5% tariff or a 7.5% tariff. You're talking about if it goes through.
Yeah, the average tariff now on auto imports is 2.5%. So this is
it's a tenfold.
You're raising a tenfold increase on tariffs. And like I say, it's in addition to, or he's saying it would be in addition to, the reciprocal tariffs planned for next week. So overall, the cost of importing autos from overseas will go up considerably, and yeah, sure, this will have an effect on. But it's not just the cost; it's just the cost of automobiles. Period. That's the point. If you levy these, if you put these levies on an entire industry, of which half is part of the export market, it doesn't matter that you're not it doesn't matter in the short term that you're not putting them on American-made vehicles. That doesn't that affect. But whatever it is, you would say that the cost increase on the American-made vehicle would be less than the cost on the Volvo import. Absolutely, of course it would. Right. But that doesn't mean that the American product won't get more expensive also, because of the laws of supply and demand. It's just a question of what pinches consumers' pockets. Right. Is it a $500 increase on their Chevy, or is it a $10,000 increase on the Volvo? What do we know about the Trump? This is something you've been talking about, and is the big political shift of our time, right? That Republican Party seems to be becoming the party of the working class. And what is this? What defines someone being in the working class? There are two things. One is that they will tend to be the people who work with their hands or with their bodies, and the other is that they have less money. So if you are forcing them to spend $500 more on a car, I'll go buy a car. It'll cost $500 more. I'm financing or leasing the car
at a 5% interest rate. It comes out as, $7 a week or something like that. It's not great. But like it's the classic joke, right? It's the cost of a venti latte that I'm paying. But that's me. I'm not the Trump voter who has gone Republican for the first time, or has now gone Republican twice, for the first time in 100 years, who is now going to suffer the consequences of Trump economic decisions. And I don't think that is necessarily the case, that the Republican Party has those people in a perma lock for several generations.
No, if it doesn't balance out, and if the overall income growth doesn't outpace the rise in prices attributed to Trump tariffs, then it's a major problem for Trump and the Republicans. No one wants. I'm not advocating for increasing.
I know. I'm not saying you're
prices.
advocating.
What I'm saying is that it has to be viewed as through a large, dynamic economy, where the effects that we can point to directly are often dissipated or mitigated because of other factors.
I agree. I just think it's an interesting wrinkle,
But
that if this were the old Republican Party that wouldn't have liked tariffs because it ideologically was committed to an idea about free trade that Trump does not possess, the net potential political damage of the tariffs would be lessened on the Republican Party. Trump is essentially aiming this major political move, geopolitical, geoeconomic, macroeconomic move, at people who are fresh, new Republicans who might form the basis of an enduring coalition. And he is really going to test the strength, durability, and survivability of that coalition.
Well, it's already showing cracks. I mean, I think it explains in part why a few weeks ago we heard J.D. Vance trying to make a speech embracing both Silicon Valley technocratic elites and tying it to working class Americans and saying we're all on the same page here, even though in fact they're not at all economically in particular on the same page. State election in Pennsylvania that a couple of politicos have been watching in Lancaster County that went 16 points to Trump in the last election and now is moving to the Democratic candidate in this election. There's some other special elections in the next week or so that people will be watching. But I was recalling, didn't we go through an earlier version of this story, season 1 with Harley Davidson? Because remember, the Trump coalition loves Harley Davidsons. And then there was this whole tariff war in his first term about Harley Davidson in India, then Harley Davidson in Thailand. And that ended up being this huge snafu with, again, I'm still trying to piece together exactly what happened in that whole thing. But it showed the sophistication, as Matt was saying earlier, of a global trade in any sort of manufactured goods, and how many parts come from many different places. And that Trump hitting with this blunt instrument saying, for national security and for the betterment of U.S. workers, if I just bludgeon this company or bludgeon this industry with tariffs, it'll all shake out in the end. It didn't work that way with Harley Davidson either. Like, it ended up being kind of a mess. So I wonder if he clearly didn't learn that lesson, but his base didn't seem to care. So maybe it doesn't matter if they feel a little suffering, if ideologically they think that he's still got their best interests.
Yeah, but the U.S. market for motorcycles is,
it's niche, it's small.
2 or
yes.
3% of people buy motorcycles. So the effect of raising the cost of motorcycles is considerably different. That's also like one of those unexpectedly higher income.
There's another example, though, and that's the agricultural sector, because the tariff war of Trump 1 resulted in losses to American farmers. And then Trump, remember, basically bailed out a lot of American farmers to compensate them for the losses in trade that he caused through the tariff war with China. And we're going to have something similar here in 2025 and in the second Trump term. At the same time, farmers still very strong for Trump. So I do think he has a certain amount of elasticity with his base because they continue to see him as acting on their behalf as the one politician of the last generation who actually recognizes the working class, talks to the working class, and wants to be that class's champion.
Yeah. I mean, we are not Homo economicus, right? We are not. This is, if there any lesson of the last 40 years should be, coming home to people, is despite the "it's the economy stupid" slogan, people are motivated by many other concerns aside from not. I mean, it's a weird thing because inflation does cut through most of that, and inflation, because it is the direct experience of people on a daily basis in their interactions using the money that they make with the sweat of their brow. But people do think that Trump is their tribune, and they think it for all kinds of reasons that are undeniably true, right? He is defending two genders. He is essentially defending religion. He is defending Israel, which is a far more important issue than people realize in sectors of the economy far away from the pages of Commentary magazine. He is defending things that Democrats have abandoned or are on the attack on. And so they're right to look at him and say, well, he cares about us and what we care about. And so, yeah, it's not that he is without resources or political resources to attempt this thing. It's just that one weirdness of it is that he is the only person outside of, Orrin Cass's think tank and Compact magazine that is like celebrating and pushing and advocating for tariffs, and Peter Navarro. Like, this is not, it's not like he's at the forefront of a really developed intellectual argument about why this is necessary for the American economy, which was the case when Reagan agreed to and advocated for the Kemp-Roth across the board 30% over 3 years tax cut that jump-started the economy in the 1980s. That was a 10-year painstaking intellectual process to make the case for the supply side that obviously many people even then and even now do not believe in. This is Trump wanting to fulfill his longtime desire to do tariffs. And he doesn't have a lot, except for people being scared of him and not wanting to criticize him because he'll write a truth against you and be mean. Nobody wants these except for him, as far as I can tell.
No, I think that's true. I mean, I agree that his base will endure a lot. But the fact remains that across the board, I mean, the larger population, his numbers on handling the economy have fallen and fallen and fallen.
Right.
I see no reason why that won't continue to happen if he continues with this. As I say, I do think it won't happen. I don't see this, at least not for any extended period of time.
It's also interesting because when you do it country by country, as opposed to product by product, you do have the possibility, particularly with kind of largely state-run, or at least, countries where the state manages the economy a lot more than even ours does, though people seem to think that we have a state-managed economy. So you put a tariff on Mexico, and Claudia Sheinbaum was nice to you, then you can lift the tariff on Mexico. If you put a tariff on automobiles, and maybe Toyota comes and says, we'll build another plant in Tennessee, and you get a celebration, the tariff is still on the automobile industry. So it's not like you can lift them, you can add an exception here and there. It's that the overall effect doesn't change. And to get to the national security point that Christine brought up, I think that there is an unfortunate, in terms of what we would like, or I think we would like the American people to believe and understand, and a policy that we need to pursue, is that China is our primary adversary in the world for the next, 75 years. And the argument to be made is that we need to make sure that its economy does not become the engine of our own defeat. And we do not need to be selling them the rope, or essentially providing them with the rope to hang us with. And therefore, things like tariffs as a weapon short of war could be a way of dealing with an adversary, not because it benefits us economically, but because it hurts them economically, and we want them to be hurt economically. So They're not spending money on their defense. They're not spending money threatening Taiwan. They're not spending money on the Silk Road Initiative, and they're not, coming after us. But you weaken, or you make that argument tertiary if you say, no, everyone's going to pay that, not just the Chinese electric car market, but Volvo. Yeah, which we don't have that much of a, I don't have much of a problem with Sweden, as far as I know. I mean, they're
Very safe cars, and they're
very
about
safe.
to get a lot more expensive.
They always were. That's the
They
thing.
were always, they're already expensive.
They were always expensive. And the favorite car for many, many decades of the DC area. So of the sort of lawyer elite managerial class of the DC area. Like, it was sort of like the Ford Taurus of Northwest DC.
Yep.
The Volvo. Every third car.
As a
Volvo.
book that came out in Trump's first term put it, the title was Trade Wars or Class Wars. So maybe we can view the tariff threat as a way to attack the latte sipping, laptop working Volvo owner.
Except those owners, of course, moved on to the Prius and the Tesla.
Well, this
there's
is the
the
paradox.
others.
As I said, like the one that's insulated is Rivian, which is extremely expensive already, and you do see around the Washington, D.C. area quite a bit. And then Tesla, which that laptop class now detests because of Elon's affiliation with Trump. So maybe this is a way to get them back into the Teslas. We'll see.
I just saw a new thing for the elite class to start boycotting. I don't even know if it's true, because it's like something I saw on TikTok or so. But that apparently either the head of or one of the leading figures in the company that runs Airbnb has now joined DOGE. So now it's,
wow,
don't use Airbnb.
That's going to be
You're not allowed
hard.
to use. You can't drive your Tesla to an Airbnb. You have to sell or vandalize your own Tesla, and you're going to have to go stay at a Marriott Bonvoy for your points, rather than getting a nice, house for a week.
Or you'll just be, you'll be home ridden. You won't be able to leave your house. You're just going to spend all day on the laptop writing pieces about how Trump is Hitler and we're living in the 1930s
He's
Germany.
Worse than Hitler. Let's face it.
I missed that one the other. Yeah.
Let's face it. Say what you will about Hitler, but
it's no Trump.
He didn't. He didn't not fire
Mike
his
Waltz.
defense secretary.
Yeah.
At least Hitler ran a tight ship. I mean, we are days away from that.
I know we're having a single free zone.
Already. What was remember the piece? What Trump can learn from Hitler?
Oh yeah. That was crazy Bob Kuttner, right? Say what you will about Hitler, but the founding editor.
I was reading an op-ed in a major American newspaper yesterday talking about how the Trump IRS is now going to be assisting ICE in identifying illegal immigrants. And the op-ed writer said, "We sound familiar," and the hyperlink on "Sound Familiar" went to an article on the Nuremberg laws. And I mean, I just, how do you respond to that? Mike Waltz. I know it's a signal-free zone, but I do want to point out that once again, the scandals and controversies coming from this administration don't involve the president, and it's just such a weird state of being for me, because the most controversial aspects of Trump 2 aren't actually Trump. It's Elon and DOGE, or it's now the group chat. He's just kind of floating above it all, slapping tariffs on everyone and trying to be nice to Putin.
Do you guys think, I don't want to talk about the group chat, but I do want to say this. We're going to say we don't want to talk about the group chat. And we're going to do 30 minutes on the group chat.
I broke the wall. No, I'm sorry.
But Waltz and Hegseth and a couple of people yesterday said, we are having this conversation about a successful U.S. military mission. And we're talking about it as though the mission did not go off, was not successful, and achieved its aims, and then we went back home. And of course, from the outset, when people start talking, it's like, this is not about what happened. It's about the fact that senior officials are playing fast and loose with our, most secure secrets. And maybe this time we got away with it, but it's really, really dangerous. But I do wonder whether you need the crisis to have happened for something like this to be the accelerant to a major disaster for the administration. By which I mean, you need there to be an Abu Ghraib moment where somebody reveals that the U.S. military in Iraq is behaving in egregious ways for it to gain larger purchase. And I don't think most people oppose the idea of attacking the Houthis. And I think the fact that the mission was successful as far as it went is important. And my concern now, because the Houthis, for example, just fired 2 rockets off at Tel Aviv this morning, which were intercepted. But is there a way in which this is going to capture and distract the attention of our national security leadership and make them a little more hesitant about going on and doing more of this, because it will just keep raising the question of the group chat, which they would like to see go away, in which case it really is deeply unfortunate that it's become a story, because I think the idea was this American policy toward the Houthis was going to be long term, and that we were not going to rest until they stopped firing missiles or until they were basically kind of eliminated from the chessboard.
I have to say, one thing that I believe it or not, I was impressed with by the group chat was that they were talking about hitting the Houthis in terms of the actual long-term consequences. They were talking about X% of international shipping goes through here. This is something we have to do. They weren't saying we need to make a show of force to pretend that we're doing something. So I think there is someone there has a deeper, serious understanding of what actually has to be done.
And
I have no doubt.
And I
Go
don't
ahead,
think,
sorry.
Abu Ghraib was a long time ago in people's memories. I think actually part of the reason that the response on the part of these Trump administration officials has been to double down and be defensive is the previous administration messed up and droned a family, supposedly in response to the Abbey Gate killings of Marines. And then the Secretary of Defense disappeared for a week. No one even knew where he was. There was absolutely no responsibility taken. There wasn't even a discussion in the press really much about it because they were on Team Biden. So I think the Trump folks, I still think this is incorrect. I would rather they take responsibility and say, we screwed up, let's move on. We won't do this again. Here are the new policies. But they're not going to do that. But we have a very recent example of the military screwing up in a major way and also not taking responsibility. So I think that for them is a justification for doubling down.
That's such a good point. It's a completely forgotten story. They droned this guy in a white car coming home from work, and his kids, and everyone. Yeah.
Well, could you
there were similar events.
What were the group chats about? What were the group chats about putting Biden out in front of people? I mean, were they on Signal? We don't know, but you can only imagine what the internal conversations were. We still have no idea. His
administration approved the use of Signal for a lot of these sorts of things. So,
if people were talking, I do agree, John. Though there is a sense that the players affected by this Washington hubbub and scandal may be more, maybe kind of deer in headlights when it comes to continuing the fight against the Houthis, or, in my view, more importantly, what we do about Iran in the coming weeks.
I mean, it's that Mike Tyson line, right? Which is everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So the Jeffrey Goldberg story, whether you think it has long-term consequences or not, was them getting punched in the face for the first time.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
It's a dynamic process. People then are now living in the world in which that happened, and it will have some
Now,
consequences.
I would say
for
the
their
way you
behavior.
move off the story is by doing something dramatic, and I think
Right.
that's something that Donald Trump knows deeply.
Right.
I mean, because he's spent so many decades
Yeah,
in the limelight.
redirecting,
Exactly, and
rebalancing the public
it is interesting that at least as Washington is concerned, that hasn't happened yet. So maybe this would actually lead to the policy outcome I would like of an American attack on Iran. That would definitely get the signal story out of the headlines.
Clearly, one person who does not support the possibility of an attack on Iran, or two of them, are J.D. Vance on the one hand and Steve Witkoff on the other. And I continue to be flabbergasted by the high level of involvement of Steve Witkoff in everything. Steve Witkoff, of course, being in the Signal chat, not a confirmed official. He's like a real estate guy that Trump sent out on the, there was a whole question of he's in Moscow. He said he wasn't using his phone, but he was on the chat. So if he wasn't using the government issued phone, what was he using? Was he using like the computer at the desk in the Hotel International in Moscow? I just mean like, but I mean, I don't care about that. I just mean like, it is amazing the degree to which Trump so loathes regular order that he has sort of created this kind of temporary Secretary of State and this temporary vice president, Witkoff being the temporary Secretary of State and Elon Musk kind of being the temporary vice president, because he just doesn't like the way the system works and finds it constricting and doesn't want anybody who could get hauled up in front of Congress as part of a regular reporting responsibility, not that they can't get subpoenaed. And there's this guy who was like spent 12 minutes, maybe reading, I don't know, Brett's column in the New York Times or something like that, negotiating all over the world with countries he never heard of before and groups he never heard of before, and praising the gutteries and like being in Moscow saying it's wonderful that Putin prayed for Trump. It's like weird, ordinarily people would empower somebody like this, and it would be like a person who ran Citibank for 30 years and was on a private mission or something, like somebody who has greater credentials than the hack that he put in to be a Secretary of State, and has a better personal relationship with these people, and so can have a private conversation.
I mean, I don't remember what Harry Hopkins' resume was, but I mean, it wasn't. I don't think he was the head of Citigroup or something. I mean, that I kind of view Witkoff as kind of that, a Harry Hopkins to FDR.
I mean, there was no
Colonel House to Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
Kind of just someone who's in the kitchen cabinet that the president trusts and who is in business with, and is kind of as you say, a shadow Secretary of State, leading these discussions. What's unique about this administration is that there are two of them. There's also Musk, who's also kind of a Harry Hopkins figure. Yeah. And Trump seems to just want to have people who are loyal to him, who are outside the establishment, and will also present a different type of view. So there's, so Rubio is considered more hawkish than Witkoff, right? That's the balance there. And JD is more dovish than Waltz, right? And Hegseth seems to be kind of in between in a lot of these cases. We know Tulsi Gabbard is more on the dovish side, but John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, he's a little bit more hawkish, right? So Trump seems to like these kind of conflicting attitudes. And my theory is that's because they're a reflection of his own internal conflict, where he can't quite decide whether he wants to be a dove or he wants to be a power-wielding hawk.
I guess the other difference is that the nature of these kinds of special envoy, advisor, kitchen cabinet people was that they worked under the radar. They did not
like Vernon Jordan.
Interviews.
Vernon Jordan fixing all the Monica Lewinsky trouble behind the scenes before he was
right.
home.
Or I mean, almost anybody that you can name, the last thing that they were going to do was go on a Sunday show. That's the whole point, is that they were operating, if they were operating outside the boundaries of normal convention, they were also doing so in private. And the point was that they were private envoys sending private messages that were that I can go talk tachlis to you. I was just with the president and I was just on the phone. Here's what he'd really like to say. We're not going to say it in public, but we can say it in private. And then Witkoff is going on talk show. I assume Trump doesn't mind him going on, or he would say, don't go on talk shows. Well, he shouldn't want him to, because he's not helping him. But I'm not Trump's, advisor, so there's nothing I can do. But like having Witkoff go on a Sunday show and say, maybe I was duped by the Houthis.
No, by Hamas.
Or by Hamas, excuse me.
Duped by Hamas.
Yeah, I was
but as Matt says, the scandals or semi-scandals swirling around the administration are all not around Trump. So,
right. So that helps him.
Yeah. In some sense,
fire away from him.
I mean, certainly the Elon case, I think, is the most obvious example. Yeah. But in some sense, it all helps him in that way. They're all, as people have put it, heat shields.
Well, he is able then to go before the people and the voters and talk in these stirring abstractions about what he's doing in Washington. Meanwhile, who's going on Fox News tonight to defend DOGE? Elon Musk. Who's been in front of the cameras arguing for Trump's version of foreign policy? Witkoff and others. So maybe he has learned something from the first term where he was the limelight hog, right? He always wanted to be in front of the camera, and maybe he's learned that lesson, that it's better to draw fire with others.
I mean, he's still in front of the
camera.
Every day.
He's signing the O's.
I mean, he hasn't completely transformed his character in 4 years.
But it is all a television show. I think that's the difference. And I do think that in the second term, Trump has decided to rather have the office shape him, which he attempted in his first term and, of course, struggled with and was unsuccessful in many ways, conforming to the office. He has now decided to reshape the office of the presidency. Right. And part of that plays to his strengths. One of his strengths is he is a master television producer. And so this is just the show that we're watching. And so it's all going to be in public. He wants Witkoff on television and on Tucker Carlson. And he wants Mike Waltz to go on Laura Ingraham. And he loves the Executive Order Hour, where every afternoon Will Scharf presents him with the order that he's about to sign and reads it aloud like a royal proclamation. And Trump has just wonderful facial expressions as Scharf is reciting the line. Yeah, he's contemplating it. He agrees with some parts. Sometimes he raises an eyebrow, like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that," but he's going to sign it anyway. It's all a big show.
It's a great point. I just want to say it's not even a show. It's like he's got his own network. He's programming. He's got several shows in place.
Yeah, there's a Steve Witkoff show.
Yeah.
But he's Johnny. Wherever you slice it, not to get like incredibly old, but he's Johnny Carson. That is to say, when it comes to it, there's one person who is watched by 40 million people, and that's Johnny Carson
behind the desk.
So behind the desk, and then, but yeah, you can have the Steve Witkoff show. You can have the Mike Waltz show if you want that, or the Elon Musk show. The interesting thing about Musk, by the way, is that when he makes these public appearances, when he talks, I think he comes across as much more reasonable and much less crazy, because he says all that he says. Look, I'm only doing this because the president asked me to help him. I'm a patriotic American. I want to help. I don't really need to be doing this. I want to help. And I'm following the instructions that I'm getting from the president of the United States. And I'm trying to make things better for the American people, like that. It's when he's on X that he's a psychotic. It's interesting. There's two sides of his personality. Or if he's like, I don't know, hasn't taken his meds in half an hour and he's in the Oval Office jumping around with his son on his shoulders.
The platform is designed to help people express their id. Let's just put that. That is literally its design.
And he paid $50 billion for it. And so it's his id and he's there. But I suspect that his TV appearance today will be helpful to him. Like, he will not come across like a crazy person. But I do think it's an interesting problem. He owns a publicly traded company, and for whatever reason, however it works, and I assume he obviously is its majority shareholder or whatever, damage is being done to his company's reputation and its standing and all of that. And at some point, he has a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders of Tesla, stuff like that. If this gets really bad, I believe, I don't mean that he should not do this because people are setting fire or being terrorists and terrorizing Teslas and terrorizing Tesla owners. But it is because of this unprecedented nature of his relationship and his behavior here in the federal government. There are the conflict of interest thing might well be that he's doing himself and his businesses and his employees real damage here, as the Democrats decide that he is their better target. Kind of find it hard to believe that people are going to vote against Republicans because of Elon Musk.
Yeah. It's interesting that I don't know where he's appearing. That's the first I heard. He has a big interview today on Thursday.
I think it's Brett Baer.
Right. Oh, great. But he needs to. I think he needs to do some damage control on the Social Security question,
right?
Because the administration has kind of not really fumbled the ball, but it's sent mixed signals about the future of the Social Security Administration. And this is a program, third rail of American politics. You really want to get right on it, which, of course, Trump has always made a point throughout his political career from the very beginning, saying he's not going to touch Social Security. He's not going to touch Medicare, understanding that his coalition belongs to those programs, is supportive of those programs. In the case of Social Security, people believe, probably slightly incorrectly, that it's something, basically it's a savings account that they get when they retire, right? And when in fact it's just money that's transferred out of government revenues.
Well, if you die 2 years into your getting Social Security, it was a savings account. If you live 1 second longer
right.
than the first 2 years after you've retired and started taking Social Security, it's essentially just a direct welfare payment from the government.
But people view it as an earned benefit, right? So whenever, unlike other welfare and income maintenance programs, where they're more skeptical and willing to cut, with Social Security, you don't want to mess around with it because people feel as though it's theirs and they earned it. And so, I hope that Musk addresses that in his interview today.
And this is an important point, because thus far other officials in the Trump administration have sounded absolutely out of touch with how the average American understands Social Security benefits. Was it Besant, the Treasury Secretary? Somebody went on an interview a few weeks ago.
Howard Lutnick.
Oh, sorry, it was Lutnick. Yes, thank you.
We could talk about.
It still bothers me. I must have blanked on his name because of the rage I felt when he said this. But
I wish I could blank.
A very, very wealthy man who was saying, "Oh, people don't really care if there's a little glitch in their Social Security payments because my mother-in-law, she would be fine with it." That sort of flippant remark shows how out of touch they're just as elite and out of touch about some of this stuff as they're often accusing the Democrats of being. And that really struck me, because a smart Republican knows you want to keep the old people, absolutely certain that their Social Security check will arrive, because many of them do rely on it to get through a month. And I think that's actually, it'll be interesting to see if Musk can speak in those terms, or if he'll just avoid that entirely. But that was a horrible thing for an administration official to suggest with such cavalier disregard for people's monthly budgets.
Well, Howard Lutnick has a life history of behaving in absolutely grotesquely inappropriate ways when left to his own devices. So he's easily next to RFK. I think he is probably the worst choice for selection for cabinet secretary. And ordinarily you stick somebody at Commerce and they disappear, but he's not disappearing, unfortunately. And the Lutnick story, if people want to remember, if the name is dimly familiar to people, is that he was the managing director of the firm Cantor Fitzgerald which was on the 103rd floor of the World Trade Center, and I think lost 600 people who worked at Cantor Fitzgerald were killed on the morning of 9/11. And Lutnick swung into action and laid off the entire firm, fired everybody at the firm in a panic, and shocked. While everybody was in total, sort of shock and horror in this attack, it was one of these moments of sort of, I wouldn't say predatory capitalism, but it was like, well, what do you expect me to do? I'm not going to have any income, and the markets are closed, and I don't have anybody working here. And somebody in the next couple of days had to impress upon him the fact that not only did he have to rescind this and work with his remaining employees and everybody to save his firm from the wrecking ball, but that his name would go down in history as one of the blackest names in the history of capitalism. And so he shifted. He swung in the other direction. He was calling all the families of the people who had been it was cutting off, excuse me. It wasn't that he was firing everybody. It was that he immediately cut off the salaries of the people who had been killed, so that their families were going to have no money. And this was not just, people, managing directors, there were secretaries and IT people and all of that. Anyway, so there were stories over the subsequent decade about the sort of the re-education of Howard Lutnick, how he learned how to behave, and how this hurt him and changed him, and he grew, and he hired PR firms to make the growing stories and all of that. Apparently he hasn't grown, because he thinks it's perfectly fine to say that a 70-year-old person who does not have any money the only people who say they need their Social Security payments are scammers.
He was very casual on the All In podcast, which I watched and which I thought was very interesting. And when he made this comment, I do think that's part of the medium of podcast, as we all know. Sometimes you say something kind of flippantly without thinking about it.
Never.
Yeah, I know. You never do it, John.
Never.
You're always deliberate and responsible in what you say. But I think that's what happened here, and it's damages the administration. And on the one hand, Trump likes bringing people who are outside of Washington, who are not part of the political class. Not so much in Lutnick's case, but in other cabinet members, people who are young, right? Like our national security advisor and our secretary of defense and our director of national intelligence. Even our secretary of state is pretty young compared to some of his predecessors. But that means that they're going to be learning on the job. And in government and politics, if you make a mistake, it can have major consequences down the road politically.
Right. Okay, so it's time for commentary recommends. I'm going to take on the commentary recommends, because I went to see yesterday this glittery production of Othello on Broadway with Denzel Washington and Jake Gyllenhaal.
The hot ticket.
It's a hot ticket, and I was there.
You're not going to be able to buy a Rivian after those tickets.
That's true. Well, he should slap a tariff on Shakespeare, and then
that's coming.
Maybe no, this was an all-American production. Let me tell you, only one performer was British, and she did a pretty bad American accent playing Desdemona. So my report on this production, which features two-time Academy Award-winning Denzel Washington as Othello and Jake Gyllenhaal, a very, very honored young actor, as Iago, is that it's one of the first times that I can recall seeing Shakespeare, seen a lot of Shakespeare, where the supporting cast was exemplary. Like characters that you don't pay much attention to I saw it a couple of years ago, like Brabantio, who is basically in the first scene, is Desdemona's father reacting with horror to the fact that she has married this Moor, this black man, because he is this incredibly successful general who has helped save Venice and is obviously the most virile person on earth. And she has fallen for him because of his overwhelming Musk and sexual desirability. So that's a character who basically is like an old man sort of crying and screaming. And this actor, Daniel Pierce, does a magnificent job turning him into kind of a semi-comic character. Character plays Amelia, who is Iago's actress who plays Amelia, who is Iago's wife, and delivers this astounding monologue that you forget in the middle of the fourth act, which is one of those moments where you realize that Shakespeare was genuinely a man out of time, because it is essentially a feminist. It is first stage feminism. It is what it is that women can expect, what women should do with men that men do to women, because there's literally no reason for women to live under men's sway when men behave so badly, and what they could do to give it back to the men who treat them so poorly. And you read this and you realize he's writing it in the 1590s or whatever, and that somehow these thoughts would not begin to resurface on the planet Earth until the mid 19th century. You know, that kind of these moments that happen in Shakespeare where you're like, where did he come from? Like, where did this consciousness come from that comes out of nowhere? And it is a genuinely great play, but I am sorry to report that Denzel Washington, while a wonderful film actor and deserving of his Oscars and one of the biggest stars of the last 40 years, just doesn't have the size to play Othello, who is all he is a Titanic character. Titanic in his moods, Titanic in his feelings, Titanic in his abilities, and Titanic in his idiocy and foolishness, and the capacity to be fooled and tricked by Iago. And he plays it small, and you can't play Othello small because it makes the ultimate tragedy not believable. It doesn't make it believable that this smallish kind of man would take the measure that he does, or fall so prey to the green-eyed monster of jealousy that he would do what he
how was
does.
How was the other movie star, Jake Gyllenhaal?
So this is a weird thing. So Gyllenhaal plays Iago as the character. No one saw this movie, but he's essentially a version of his character in a movie called Jarhead from 20 years ago.
That's
where
a great
he played
movie.
a soldier.
Yeah, I was just saying,
It's a very
A lot
good
of people
movie.
saw Jarhead.
Yeah.
It's a great
But
movie.
nobody saw Jarhead. It was not a hit.
I
You
saw it.
Jarhead because you're you, but people didn't see Jarhead. But he looks like he does in Jarhead. He's in kind of like fatigues for most of the. He is Othello's lieutenant, so he's in the fatigues for most of the play. But he plays Iago as a kind of bro. He is mostly sort of physical. I wouldn't say animalistic, but he's like his relations as he's kind of getting people on his side and bluffing them into doing his bidding and all that is kind of like Eric Stratton, chairman of Delta House, damn glad to meet you. It's all kind of like he's kind of being a bro. And it's interesting. It's an interesting, like, he keeps your attention, but it's fundamentally a bad interpretation. Like the whole point of Iago. And then I went and I listened. You can hear an hour abridged version it's actually on the Internet Archive of a BBC, an abridged version in which John Gielgud is Othello and Ralph Richardson is Iago. These two, maybe the greatest stage actors aside from Laurence Olivier of the 20th century. And what you get from Richardson is the lubricious pleasure of being evil and of being the plotter. And Gyllenhaal has none of that. He is more like, Othello deserves it. And what about me? And all of that, as opposed to the structure of the play, which is that Iago is bringing you the viewer, this person in the audience, into his confidence to make you his accomplice. Sort of like, now watch what I'm going to do here.
There's,
That's
I do wonder,
yeah,
what you're describing is a very American production. And I took my kids when they were little. We went and saw it at the Reconstructed Globe Theatre in London. And there, it doesn't act, the size actually is immediate in terms of Othello comes on the stage and whatever actor, I forget his name, but there's a wonderful British actor playing it at this production. Because of how you're seated in the theater is designed, he seems enormous. And that's partly the way the stage is raised just above the little benches you're sitting on. It's all by candlelight. Desdemona seems insane, but Iago is right in your face when he's plotting. And it was so mesmerizing that even and they were pretty young, they were elementary school kids, they just sat there sort of awestruck by what was in front of them. And I wonder if putting it on a larger stage with American actors, you don't get that scale that I think is how Shakespeare wrote. I mean, he wrote for that scale.
well, so 40 years ago, I saw a production of Othello on Broadway with James Earl Jones and Christopher Plummer. And that
It's James Earl Jones.
was great.
I mean,
And Christopher Plummer. So, but I mean, this is the second time that Denzel Washington has taken a James Earl Jones part and played it on Broadway. He did Fences, which was this August Wilson play about a minor league baseball player in his 50s who's become a garbage man, and his desperate unhappiness with the position that he's in. It's one of the best American plays of the 20th century. And Jones was titanic. He was like, and he was on stage in general, he was just a force of nature. It was one of the great performances I've ever seen. And when Denzel played it, he was kind of like a canny, wiry, kind of tricky guy. And the whole point of this play is that he keeps saying, Troy, the character in Fences, I've got this demon in me, and this demon wants me to do things like take a baseball bat and smash my beloved son over the head with my baseball bat. And I am spending my entire time holding myself back from doing these things. And you could see it in his body. And Denzel doesn't have that. And so
it's interesting because what makes Denzel Washington so compelling on film is the nuance, the subtlety, right? The way he delivers lines in unexpectedly reserved, thoughtful, quirky ways that give this sort of complete natural effect.
Yeah.
And if what this calls for is the opposite, I could imagine.
Yeah, well, I mean,
exactly
so
saying,
the movie that he won his first Oscar for, Glory, right, where he plays this escaped slave who fights for the Massachusetts 54th, the Black Battalion. The great scene that won him the Oscar is the scene in which he gets whipped for his insubordination and does not make a sound. And it's all his face, and it's tears streaming down his face and his tightened jaw and all of that. But it's, again, all about, it's what he doesn't do. And Othello is mood made flesh. He's proud, he's vain, he's vainglorious, he's arrogant. And then he starts going mad with jealousy, and the madness is right there on the surface and is not subtle, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Anyway, it's always worth seeing Shakespeare. I mean, it's not worth seeing really bad. I saw 5 or 6 years ago, saw a production which John Lithgow played King Lear in Shakespeare in the Park in New York. And Lithgow is a wonderful actor, and he was terrible, terrible, terrible as Lear. He was just, it's so sad because, again, Lear is not a part for him because Lear is a mad scene, right? Lear is literally crazy from the moment he hits stage to the moment, and then the question is he senile? Is he just proud? And he makes all these terrible decisions, and Lithgow is just too sensible, comes across as too sensible a person to be King Lear. So it can be really bad to see bad Shakespeare. Don't get me wrong. But this production is worth seeing in that It moves well. It's fast. It's intelligently conceived as in stage pictures and stuff like that, and with the brilliant casting of these subsidiary parts. Most interestingly to me, Cassio, who is the character that Iago picks to be the object of Othello's jealousy, Desdemona's friend Cassio, who Iago pours the poison in his ear that she's actually in love with Cassio. And it was interesting to me because the actor who played him, whose name is Matthew Burnap, I had just seen 3 days ago in Snow White. He is the sort of the prince in Snow White, in which he is spectacularly bland. And I saw him play King Arthur in a production of Camelot a couple of years ago, in which he was spectacularly bland. And he had won a Tony a couple of years ago for a play I hadn't seen, which struck me as being bizarre since he was so bland. And he was really wonderful in this. So it's weird because, as I say, the supporting players are fantastic. So, what about, it's sort of like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Maybe this production with Othello should have been about the supporting cast and not about the two principals. But so if you want to go see Denzel Washington on stage at the age of 69, looking fantastic, and Jake Gyllenhaal looking like he did in Jarhead, spend a lot of money, you can go see it. And it's not a waste of your time, but it is as expensive as Arabian.
This might be the first lukewarm commentary recommends. We've had the non-recommend, the don't.
I don't even know what to call it.
I have a more affordable commentary recommends.
Yeah, so
today is opening day. Watch a baseball game. That's my recommendation. Watch a baseball. You can watch it for the price of a TV set or a price of a ticket. Just watch a baseball game today.
All right. Do you think that the Mets have a shot this year? That's my question.
I think they have a shot at the playoffs, but
yeah.
I don't think anyone can predict what happens in the playoffs ever.
Thank you for that.
Another pearl of wisdom.
You're really putting yourself out
Another
there.
pearl of wisdom.
Only my time baseball, will tell.
That's my lesson of baseball fandom.
Yeah. There's a great line in the movie called
Everything's Off with the Playoffs.
Okay, here's an actual commentary recommends the 1982 Paul Mazursky film Tempest.
Now the third.
This Tempest, which is based on The Tempest.
Okay.
Contemporary version of The Tempest, in which John Cassavetes plays the magician Prospero, essentially, as an architect who goes to a Greek island. And anyway, it's a wonderful, crazy, funny, hilarious movie. And there is a conversation between John Cassavetes and his father. He's going through this midlife crisis, and he's like, "Dad, what on earth am I going to do?" And his father says, in a great line, "Life is like baseball." He says, "It's a long season."
That's right.
Which has always stuck in my head, and is the defense for Matt's refusal to make any predictions about the ultimate disposition of the Mets. Okay, so we've gone long. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. For Matt, Christine, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.